so strongly about it that I'm running for school committee here in Halifax. John Chabon requested that our selectmen put a question on our ballot coming up on May 16th. He asked our citizens if they want to remove Common Core and return back to our 2010 framework. Our selectmen agreed to put the question on the ballot, but on the condition that we hold a forum that would have both sides of the issue so our citizens could make an informed decision, and we agreed and welcomed the idea. On March 31st, I emailed the Commissioner's Office of the Department of Education and told them about our forum, our ballot question, and our selectmen's wishes. A woman named Lauren Green replied to me on April 2nd and wrote, I quote, "We are unable to attend. The department has held many open forums on the academic standards and assessment system to enable parents to learn more and ask pertinent questions. We do not have any additional meetings scheduled at this time." End quote. Then they referred me to their website. 4 days later at our school committee meeting, Superintendent Tuffy announced that he had corresponded with the Department of Education, and their story changed to agreeing to have the forum, but there was a condition that they would have their own and that there would not be any other speakers. The speakers at that forum, when questioned why both sides were not present, replied that they felt they needed the whole evening to present their side. It is too bad that they would not have joined us tonight to save our citizens from coming out for 2 nights with their busy schedules, but we really appreciate that you are here now. Personally, I hope you vote yes on question 1 on Saturday, May 16th, but our speakers tonight are more educated on the subject than me, so I will turn the microphone, or not, to them. Lastly, I wanted to add, our speakers are here because they feel strongly about the subject of Common Core. Their bosses did not send them here. Their bosses did not tell them what to say. Their jobs are not on the line. They are just here to present their concerns. First, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Sandra Stosky. She is credited with developing one of the country's strongest set of academic standards for K-12 students, as well as the strongest academic standards and licensure tests for prospective teachers while serving as Senior Associate Commissioner in the Massachusetts Department of Education from 1999 to 2003. She served on the National Validation Committee for the Common Core State Systematic Initiative from 2009 to 2010. Please help me welcome Dr. Sandra Stosky.
I don't need to stand here. I can stand closer.
I say you come close.
To the audience.
Yes.
I would prefer. This is doing something here.
I just ignored it.
It's hot. Okay. Anyway, thank you all for turning out, and I agree with what the speaker just said. It's too bad the Department of Education folks aren't here on the same night, but I can understand from a few of the remarks that apparently they made why they're not here, because I would be able to contradict them on just about everything they said. So this is a serious problem. I'm going to tell you about what the facts are, because I was there, Charlie. I was on the state board from 2006 to 2010. I was in the Department of Education from 1999 to 2003. So I know what happened. I helped to develop the standards, and I was on the state board at the time Common Core was being developed. And I was on Common Core's validation committee from 2009 to 2010. And I know all of the major characters in these dramas. So I do know what happened, and I've been writing a lot about it. Let's begin with what we're talking about, and that is Common Core. It is not a state-led initiative. I understand that this was one of the claims made. As everyone knows, including the Washington Press Corps and the media in general, it is a project that was developed by the National Governors Association, the Council for the Chief State School Officers, a group of people consisting of commissioners or superintendents of education, and Achieve Incorporated, which is a spin-off group in Washington, D.C. that has done over the years some curriculum development, but mainly test development and used to benchmark state standards originally. It was a spin-off from the National Governors Association. Common Core was never state-led. It was actually Gates-led. Gates Foundation gave the money to these organizations to sponsor the project and be in charge of the project. Gates has given money to a variety of organizations in education in Washington and around the country, and including some departments of education, state departments of education, to promote Common Core, disseminate Common Core, develop so-called research on Common Core's virtues, and continues to promote Common Core in anything it touches. As soon as many of us in the research world see a study that has been, even in part, funded by the Gates Foundation, conclusion will be, this is the tainted funding. There are almost no independent evaluations of Common Core's standards, except by a few people like Professor James Milgram at Stanford, with whom I have often shared the public speaking circuit, who was on the validation committee, and he has found any number of missing standards in math and other issues. I am an independent person. I have no boss. There's nobody over me. I'm retired from the University of Arkansas. I am my own boss, and I do what I want, and I don't receive any Gates Foundation money to say anything one way or the other. Never would. So you have unevaluated standards that came out of a Gates Foundation funded project developed in Washington, D.C. That's what we're really talking about. A set of standards that were never independently evaluated anywhere by anyone. Fordham Foundation received money to evaluate them from the Gates Foundation. Achieve Incorporated received money from the Gates Foundation to evaluate them. So you have a problem with standards that were never evaluated by anybody. They haven't been validated, which was the charge of the committee I was on. In addition, you have people who wrote the standards who would not be qualified to write English or math standards anywhere. Why they were chosen to this day, we still don't know. Professor Milgram has tried to find out about the math. I have tried to find out why David Coleman, now president of the College Board, was chosen, and Sue Pimentel. No records are available because private organizations develop the standards. Private organizations located in Washington, D.C. So far as we know, the Gates Foundation helped to choose these standards writers. They are not qualified. I speak mainly for the English language arts. They never majored in English. They never taught English at any level. They have never published anything about reading or English language arts. So these are the standards you are now implementing in this state, in Halifax, as well as in all the other communities in this state, in place of the standards that I supervised the development for from 99 to 2003, when I was in the department, standards that were developed by teachers in this state, vetted by teachers in this state, assessed by tests, MCAS, with test items that were vetted by teachers in this state. We don't really know what's on PARC, because PARC is being developed elsewhere, and I know that Peg Luxick is going to speak more to PARC than I will right now. But I do want to point out that the State Board of Education in July 2010 formally adopted Common Core. And the question is often posed to me, why did they adopt Common Core standards given that we had what were considered among the best K-12 standards in the country in every subject? And the answer is a very easy answer. The board knew what the answer was. The Department of Education was promised $250 million in Race to the Top money. Money buys you a lot. It bought Common Core for Massachusetts. It bought in different ways other states, but Massachusetts was a key state because once Massachusetts fell, as Commissioner Chester told us, there was a line of other states waiting to see what Massachusetts would do. And if we adopted Common Core, we were the sacrificial lamb, then all of these other commissioners would fall in line like dominoes and adopt Common Core, which they did. You can go look at the dates to see when other states adopted Common Core. Some of them, of course, for different reasons, adopted Common Core before it was written, which makes you ask yourself, on what basis? Kentucky, for example, where Gene Wilhoit used to be the Commissioner of Education and was now in charge of the Common Core project in Washington, Kentucky State Board of Ed adopted Common Core's standards in February 2010, and they hadn't been written yet. So this is constantly being thrown up in their face. How do you buy standards that haven't even been written, that you haven't seen? That's Kentucky State Board of Ed. In another state, Wisconsin, the decision was made by their state commissioner the very day that the final version of the standards was released, June 2nd. And they looked at the date, and on the afternoon of June 2nd, he approved the standards for the state of Wisconsin. Nobody else was involved. There were no reports. There were no evaluations by higher education in Wisconsin, which has many fine universities and higher ed faculty. Come look at these so-called college readiness standards and tell me what you think. None of that took place anywhere. I have spoken before many state legislative committees, and I have asked, is there any state in which either a state board of ed or a state legislative committee, either the education committee or ways and means or other, did any group in a state before Common Core was adopted contact its higher education teaching faculty, because that's the prize, and it's going to be the prize here in Massachusetts too. Did any state contact its teaching faculty and ask, do you think these college readiness standards will qualify students for credit-bearing courses if they want to go to college and are accepted and start their freshman year at your college? Not one state, nor did any state board of ed or legislative committee get a request for a cost-benefit analysis. What are these standards going to cost us? Because everyone knew that with the standards there would be a test. The test would be, at that point, either PARCC, PARC, which is an acronym, or Smarter Balanced, which is the name of the other big testing consortium. And the question was then, well, did we know anything about how these tests would be developed? Who would develop them? How they would be vetted? Nobody knew anything about that part of the process. It was still in the future, but didn't matter because the tests would have to be based on Common Core. That's the legal issue, which is why there was a rush to get as many states, and Gates has told Washington Post writers exactly this. There was a rush to get the states to adopt Common Core as fast as possible, because once you adopt a set of standards officially by a state board's decision, you then can have a state-mandated test developed and given to schools in the entire state. But the legal issue is to have that test based upon officially adopted standards. This doesn't mean that every community must adopt those standards, because that is where local control has always come in. You might not be told that, but under local control, we always knew that in the State Department of Ed when I was there, that even when we developed very good standards that received high ratings from academic subject matter experts, there were many communities in Massachusetts that didn't adopt them because it's not required. What is required is that these communities must administer the state mandated test. That also doesn't mean that all students must take them, because the legal language is quite clear in Massachusetts statute. School districts must administer the tests, but that's all. It doesn't say that all students must take them. And for 400 years, whether states were colonies or territories, it doesn't matter, parents could always keep their children at home on any day they chose to avoid any particular activity they did not want their child to participate in. This has always been available as part of parents' rights, because in this country, parents have the right to see to their child's education as they see fit. That's why we have homeschooling available. Parents have the right in every state to homeschool. There might be different laws that govern it to some extent, but the right to homeschool has always been there. So parents can opt their children out, and if you're reading the newspapers, you're probably aware that there is an opt-out movement from coast to coast taking place. Thousands in New York State alone. And a friend in California talked about one high school where the entire junior class didn't show up because they were studying for their AP tests. The point is that opt-outs are legal. Parents can opt their kids out at any time. And then the question of penalties comes up. Any penalty for a child not taking a test has to be discussed and passed by a local school board. How many people here are part of local school committees? Few of you, okay. Local school committees govern all policies affecting your schools. That's always been the case. It may not say in those words in statute, but that's what's understood the authority of a locally elected school committee member to be. Otherwise, why would you have elections for local school committee people? The only group by law that can supersede decisions of local school committees in Massachusetts would be the state legislature, because they too are elected by the people. You have to remember basic political principles. Those who are elected by the people have statutory authority. If you are in a position that has no statutory authority, unless it's indicated clearly somewhere, because the state legislature has spelled it out for you, then local school committees can do as they wish, superseded only by state law, if there is state law governing what they are doing. Otherwise, what they choose to do is up to them. So if there are to be any alternative teaching sessions, for example, if a parent says, I don't want my child to take a test, a state mandated or federally mandated test, the local school committee can tell the superintendent, we want instruction provided for those children whose parents don't want them taking a test. That's all they have to do. And under the statute, superintendents are supposed to follow what local school committees tell them to do. That's always been the nature of the relationship. It isn't the other way around. School committees don't do what the superintendents tell them to do. Superintendents do what the school committees tell them to do. I was on a library board in Brookline for 14, 15 years. Same political relationship. Head librarian brings his ideas, objectives to us, policies with options. We vote. Whatever we, as the library board, trustees of the public library, decide as a vote, as a body, that's what the head librarian does with his staff. With the schools, it's the same way. So that is Common Core and its relation to PARC that I was trying to establish some clarity about. PARC is a test only. However, As we know from MCAS, which was based on the older sets of standards we had, tests often determine what teachers will put into the curriculum because they want their students to do well on state tests that have accountability built into them. In other words, student scores are somehow going to matter for the school. What Common Core's authors or designers want to do, and it's still not clear where they're going with this, by the way, this is still a work in progress, they want the scores to be used to evaluate teachers' performance. They're going to hold teachers accountable. And eventually, at some point, they plan to have a, quotes, equitable distribution of effective teachers. What that means, nobody knows. You can only guess. How do you equitably distribute effective teachers? I mean, this isn't Soviet Union and we don't have a Siberia, but we don't know what it means to equitably distribute effective teachers. Getting the effective teacher designated as such is part of the problem, and that's where they're stuck right now. There's something statistically called value-added methodology, and it's being criticized by teacher unions and a lot of other people who don't like the idea. And by the way, I do not think that teachers should be judged, for the most part, by the results of a state-mandated test that bears little relationship to whatever the curriculum is in the school they are teaching. Let's go to what this curriculum is, because that's the next thing you have to understand. You have a set of standards that form the basis legally for the test items. The curriculum are the exact textbooks or materials used in the schools to address the standards. Supposing a standard, and we had one in grade 9, 10 in English, under the old set of standards, students had to become familiar with the themes and structure of classical Greek drama. Something like that. That's the standard. The curriculum is the English teacher chooses the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, maybe, to teach something that would address that standard. The test, and you can find these excerpts on MCAS in the early days in particular, you would have an excerpt from the Iliad or the Odyssey, a passage on a test, and that's what students would be asked to read and answer questions about. So you've got the standards, you've got the curriculum in the schools that address the standard, and then you have tests that develop in some way something that would be relating to the standard. The teacher won't know in advance whether it's going to be a passage from the Iliad or the Odyssey or maybe from the Aeneid, because teachers are not going to be able to preview the test to make sure that students are not in any one class given an unfair advantage. But teachers who see that that's a test item will know that that's the level of reading expected in grades 9 and 10. That's what you want. They'll see, this is high school reading. This is what we should be doing in high school English classes. This means I should be teaching something about that difficulty level. Now, if on a grade 9 test, 9 or 10, you see something from Charlotte's Web, which is taught in 4th grade, the English teacher would maybe think, does this mean that that level of reading is what we are aiming for? I'm doing this now in extreme so you can understand the point. The teacher would say, is that the level of reading difficulty to be aimed for in grade 9 or 10? That's why the test passages are important to think about, but we don't know in advance what they are, and part of our problem with PARC is that we will never see them because they're going to be in a computer. So we don't know what's going to be on them and what teachers will be able to teach to unless they are given curriculum guides from the Department of Education, which I understand is something that is happening. But what is in those curriculum guides, I am still not clear about. In some states, departments of education are literally specifying the works, the texts, the curriculum. this is illegal in Massachusetts, so far as I know. So here is the layout that you are now encountering in your schools. What are the problems? I have written about the problems with the English Language Arts Standards so often that I can recite them in my sleep. And you can find them on the web, so I'm not going to go into the details right now for them. If you want, I can give you, if you want to find out what I've been saying, you can Google Sandra Stotsky, Arkansas. I have a homepage at the university, and I put in, here are some handouts,
Yes,
English
your
language arts
handouts. You want
laws.
me to pass them
Fine.
out?
Why don't you, thank you, pass some of them out.
Okay, I will.
I have a one-pager that has some of these laws listed a little bit.
I've got several pages in here.
Okay, and what are the other pages?
I've got your fact sheet on
Okay.
the validation and standard. That's the one
That's
step aside.
fine.
Then I have why Common Core English Language Arts need revision.
Right,
And then I have
that's,
James Milgram's.
okay, whatever you have, pass out to anyone.
Okay.
James Milgram's pages would be on math, and I couldn't tell you anything beyond grade 7 because I can't handle algebra and any of the high school math subjects myself. But if you are an engineer or know math well for other reasons, you can see what the problems are that he spells out. But that's why he gives me permission to pass out his own critique, which he has been made available on his website at Stanford for 6 years as well. He's been, as I say, going around the country talking about the problems at the high school level in particular. And I will only mention this major issue because he's been raising it ever since he saw the final version of Common Core's math standards. He said there are no standards that will enable students to go from a weak Algebra 2, which is where they cap out, to a calculus course, which is the major requirement for freshmen at almost all engineering colleges and for all STEM majors, science, technology, engineering, and math. And his analysis has led him to say that there's no way these standards will allow students to go from weak Algebra 2, which is what the college readiness test in grade 11 will be based on, to the kind of math coursework they need for 21st century skills and jobs. How many of you can read a set of high school math standards? Anyone? Good. Can you tell me what your background is or what you do?
I teach special ed.
I'm sorry, you what?
I teach special ed 6 to 12.
You teach special ed as well. But how do you know high school math?
Because I teach 6 through 12. I can read the curriculum standard.
6 through 12, she said.
I'm sorry.
6 through 12 I work.
Oh, 6 through 12. All right, I'm sorry. I can't hear, these acoustics aren't carrying your voice forward. But this is a good part of the problem we have had with boards of education members in this country who couldn't possibly understand a set of high school math standards or know if there was a pre-calculus topic missing or not. And this is why it would have been important, even for the Massachusetts Board of Education, to have asked some mathematicians, scientists, or engineers to look and to tell them, were these standards adequate for Massachusetts students who wanted to go to an engineering college or to go into a STEM area for a 4-year degree program as undergraduates. I think I'm going to stop at this point and let the next speakers, and then I'll pick up with any more questions. Particularly if you remember statements from the members of the Department of Ed who were here the other day, and you want to just bounce them off with me, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jamie Gass. Jamie is Pioneer Institute's Director of the Center for School Reform. Jamie has more than 2 decades of experience in public administration and education reform at the state, municipal, and school district levels. Previously, he worked at the Massachusetts Office of Educational Policy and Accountability as Senior Policy Analyst, Technical Writer, and in the State Budget Office under 2 Massachusetts governors. Jamie speaks on academic standards, school choice options, and school accountability at events across the country.
Welcome, Jane.
Thanks so much, Linda, and I want to thank Bob and see Summer Schmalling and Donna Colorio. And these are all folks that have been setting up these kinds of events all over the state, really, over the last 6 to 9 months or so. And I really want to thank them and let them know how grateful we all are for the work that they're doing. So just to kind of reiterate a couple things that Sandy said. So what Common Core is, even though 40-some-odd states have adopted Common Core, what Common Core is a set of national English and math standards that were developed by the National Governors Association, which represents the governors of each state, and the Council of Chief State School Officers, which represents the commissioners of education of each state. They don't represent states, they represent the commissioners and the governors from each state. And most of the funding came from both the development of the standards and the advocacy around the standards, and that's a point that's almost over $200 million is the Gates Foundation. They're the big drivers. The Common Core is then matched with 2 sets of national testing consortia. A set of national testing consortia. There's the PARC test, which is driven by Achieving, that Sandy mentioned, which was a sort of spin-off from the Governors Association, and which is what Massachusetts is participating in, and the Board of Ed will vote on in the fall. So we've got a decision about whether we're going to keep MCAS or go with this national test PARC. And then the other testing consortia is the Smarter Balance testing consortium. States like Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and 20-some-odd others are in that testing consortium. So that kind of gives you the big picture. And so what I'm going to try to do is help provide some context for this discussion. How do we get to the point where we're talking about national standards, Common Core, PARC, federal government's role, etc. So in order to do that, I'm going to rely on someone who knew a lot more about the Constitution, a lot more about the governance of our society than anyone alive, or probably anyone in history, and that's James Madison. He's considered the father of the Constitution, and he drafted the Bill of Rights. And he wrote this in 1792. If Congress may establish teachers in every state, county, and parish, and pay them out of the public treasury, they may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing in like manner schools throughout the Union. I would venture to declare it as my opinion. It would subvert the very foundation and transmute the very nature of the limited government established by the people of America. And this is the father of the Constitution and author of the Bill of Rights, James Madison. And I say to audience, the founders were really wise. They understood that the national government does certain things, trade, foreign policy, defense, but that all of the issues that most intimately connect the lives of citizens, particularly things like education, K-12 education, is the proper legal and financial jurisdiction of states and localities. Even over the last 50 years or so, there's been a sort of steady growth in a federal role in K-12 education. The federal government only pays for about 10% of K-12 education. Very small percentages. It's a local and state responsibility. And most communities, like your community, pay for most of the education themselves. The state actually adds a very small amount to communities like your own. And this makes sense, because the founders wanted K-12 education to be the wellspring of our democracy. They wanted to have public schools be the mechanism by which we develop citizens, people that are able to vote and participate in our democracy, that they're informed enough to make the decisions that contribute to our self-government. Now, this arrangement of the national government doing the things that it does, and the state government and the local government doing the things that it's supposed to do, I would argue has actually served this country pretty well over the last 2 centuries. We've essentially gone from a loose collection of colonies along the eastern seaboard to the most powerful country in the world. It's no small accomplishment, and it's a very, very different model from what you find almost any place in the world. In Europe and a lot of places in the world, kings and queens and monarchs and czars and ministers all decide these big policy questions from the top. That's not the way it's really ever been in this country. And commentators across centuries have commented about how unique this country is because the ideas come from the citizens. And this is what the founders did. And this model has served us well, but there's no question that sometime in the decades immediately following World War II, we began to notice a decline in the quality of public schooling in this country. The first example of that was in Sputnik in 1957, when the Soviet Union launched the first satellite into orbit. And everyone was concerned that we weren't going to have the science and technological proficiency to be able to compete with our political competitor at that time in the Cold War, the Soviet Union. But as we moved through the 20th century, more and more, and globalization began to take hold, more and more people were worried that we weren't going to have the scientists and the engineers and the technical proficiency to be able to compete in the global economy with places like Japan and Germany, now places like China and India. So much so that in 1983, there was a report that was authored by the U.S. Department of Education called The Nation at Risk. And what this report said was that we were losing ground against the high-performing countries in the world. We had basically fallen from the top tier down to about 11th or 17th. And specifically it said, going into the 21st century, you've got to compete with South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, East Asian countries to compete in the 21st century. What that report did not do was come up with lots of top-down solutions from Washington, D.C. on how to solve these problems. Because everybody across the spectrum, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, all knew, what I said at the beginning, is that there are limits, and legal limits, on the authority of the federal government to influence state and local matters around K-12 education. So some people said, you know, the way to improve K-12 education is to add more school choice, things like vouchers to private and parochial schools, charter schools, vocational technical schools, that more choice would create incentives for the public system to improve itself. Other people around this time began to say, no, the solution for the problem in K-12 education and the decline in K-12 education is to have a set of national standards, national tests, and a national curriculum. Well, what Massachusetts did was really quite unique, both from a legislative standpoint and in terms of the results as well. What did Massachusetts do? Republicans and Democrats got together, guys like Bill Weld, who was Republican governor, Tom Birmingham, who later became the Senate president, Mark Roosevelt, a state rep, and Roosevelt and Birmingham are guys that had very close relationships with organized labor, pretty liberal Democrats, Weld, Republican. I only mention their party affiliation to remind us that Republicans and Democrats at one point could actually work together to solve problems. And that's exactly what happened. It was not only good politics, but good policy that came out of it. And they crafted what they call the landmark 1993 Ed Reform Law. What they decided to do was to put a great deal of additional state resources into K-12 education. And we've spent over $100 billion in the last 20 years in exchange for all of the difficult things that people in public education, not only in Massachusetts, but across the country, had not wanted to do. Specifically, we are going to have high academic standards in English, math, science, and history. You just heard from Sandy Stotsky. She was the architect of those standards. People across the political spectrum, people that are now advocates of Common Core, recognize that those standards that Massachusetts had prior to Common Core in 2010 were the best standards in the country. Okay? Even the Common Core advocates acknowledge that. They used to use Sandy to evaluate the quality of standards all across the country because she was really the only one whose standards had correlated with big gains on both national and international tests, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay? So there's the high academic standards in the basics. Right? We weren't going to do fuzzy math, we weren't going to do soft skills, we weren't going to do all these fads that had kind of done a lot of damage to K-12 education. It was going to be back to basics in a traditional kind of liberal arts education. All right? Going to couple those standards with a high-stakes test. You know that as MCAS. Teacher testing, so the students and the teachers are going to be tested on the same kinds of material. Again, with a strong academic focus. We had some charter schools to inject some school choice, so the parents had some options, particularly poor and minority students. And we were going to have accountability for everybody in the system. So it was basically a lot of money, high standards, testing, and accountability for everyone. And that equation has led to historic gains. Specifically, there's a test called the NAEP test. It's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's the nation's report card. It's been around for about 40 years or so. No state in the history of that test has ever been number one on that test in every category tested. And in 2005, Massachusetts did that. And then we did that again in 2007, and 2009, 2011, 2013. I tell audiences all over the place, that's like winning the World Series 5 times in a row and doing it in 4 games straight each time. It is a remarkable, remarkable accomplishment. The parents, the teachers, the students, the taxpayers, the lawmakers, the policymakers deserve an enormous amount of credit for it. It is a huge, huge accomplishment that exceeds the wildest expectations of people like Tom Birmingham and Bill Weld and Mark Roosevelt, who wrote the law in '93. To give you a sense of how far we came in math alone, we were essentially 11th or 12th in the country on that NAEP test. And within a relatively short period of time, we're number 1. Okay? But as I mentioned in that report, the Nation at Risk report was very clear. To compete in the 21st century, you've got to compete with the East Asian Tigers. So in 2007, we tested as our own individual country. We were only one of 2 states in the Union to participate on a test called the TIMSS test. It's the gold standard of international math and science testing. And Massachusetts 8th graders were tied for number 1 in the world in science. In the area of mathematics, in both the 4th and 8th grade, we were among the top 3 or 4 countries in the world, right? Again, we did this in 2007, we did it in 2013. I say that those are like winning Olympic gold medals. It's a remarkable, remarkable accomplishment. Huge, huge turn of events that's driven by very sound policy making, very clear standards that were the envy of the country. So in 2007, 2008, when the Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers began to develop Common Core, and when states begin to think about adopting Common Core, which they did through the federal grant program called Race to the Top, Sandy mentioned that. The federal government dangled essentially $4.3 billion in front of states when they were fiscally beleaguered in that 2009, 2010. And in exchange for being competitive for that money, they had to sign on to a list of priorities that was articulated by the U.S. Department of Education. One of those priorities was signing on to Common Core. In the first round Race to the Top, Massachusetts did not sign on to Common Core. And the number one state in the union, the only state that's internationally competitive, scored 13 out of 16 of the states that applied for Race to the Top. The next round, we went from 13 to number 1. We only changed one thing. We adopted Common Core. It tells you exactly what Sandy said just a couple minutes ago. They had to have Massachusetts. It was the trophy that they had to put on the mantelpiece, because if Massachusetts signed on, then low-performing states like Mississippi or Arkansas, or Louisiana, or Alabama had no choice to sign on, because if Massachusetts did it, everyone had to follow suit. So they had to have Massachusetts do it, which is why we got the $250 million for Race to the Top. So, the Pioneer Institute, where I work, is an independent think tank. We've been around for about 20 years or so. We're known primarily for the work we've done around charter schools, but we've been a big driver on independent, nonpartisan, data-driven research, and we're pretty much known for calling it like we see it. So given that Massachusetts had an enormous amount to lose in this equation of adopting Common Core, prior to the adoption, we got our hands on the best researchers we could on this topic to map out what it is that was at stake. Specifically, we got Sandy, who had worked on the standards in Massachusetts, but a bunch of other states, and we got Jim Milgram, who is an internationally renowned mathematician at Stanford University, who also had written the very high-quality California math standards. And we also coupled them together with a guy named Zev Werman, who was a Silicon Valley engineer who had also worked on the math standards in California. And what they did in these mapped out 40, 50-page research, peer-reviewed pieces of research, is that they looked at every draft of the 4 drafts of Common Core against high standard states like Massachusetts and Indiana and Texas and Minnesota and others, and compared both in English and mathematics how Common Core stacked up against the best. And what they found, at every step of the way, Common Core was of lower academic quality in both English and mathematics. Specifically, the Common Core had ignored the lessons from Massachusetts in English and math. The big takeaway lessons from Massachusetts were the secret to our success in reading was the deep commitment to classic literature, poetry, and drama. It's things like Huckleberry Finn, Sherlock Holmes, Edith Wharton, Emily Dickinson, Charles Dickens. The quality of the vocabulary and the language and the text offered in novels and drama and poetry is more complicated. It requires students to read between the lines, and it requires them to understand plot development and setting and tragedy and comedy, all these things that are more complicated language. That's how kids do well on reading tests. That was the big lesson on the reading side. Common Core completely ignored it. Not only did they ignore it, they decided to cut classic literature, poetry, and drama in a state like Massachusetts or Indiana or California by about 60%. So all those high-quality pieces of literature that were included in the Massachusetts standards really get brushed aside under Common Core. On the math side, what the researchers learned was that the secret to the success in Massachusetts, the secret to the success and the quality of the standards in California and all the East Asian countries was, and 15,000 pieces of research make this clear, you have to have access to the Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. That allows kids that are interested in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to get on a path where they can take pre-calculus, calculus, and trigonometry, if that's what they choose to do in high school. But you've got to start early enough so you can get on that path. So what did Common Core decide to do on the math side? They ignored that lesson too. They decided to push access to Algebra 1 forward to 9th or early 10th grade. So Professor Milgram has made clear that even by 7th grade or so, students in the United States under Common Core will be a couple of years behind their international competitors. It's an enormous backpedaling on things that were hard-won battles, both in Massachusetts and California in the 90s, during what they called the math wars. But it goes further than that. It's not just that they push forward the access to Algebra 1. They have an experimental form of geometry that's never been successful in any place it's ever been tried. And Professor Milgram tells us that Common Core really tops out what they call Algebra 2 Light. Folks, if your kids are interested in STEM, Common Core is a path to nowhere. That's the reality. And it's not me talking. If you actually look at some of the quotes from the architects, the authors, and the advocates of Common Core, they will tell you, and you can do a Google search for a guy named Jason Zimba. He's the man who wrote the Common Core math standards. If you do a Google search for Jason Zimba, Board of Ed, to a YouTube, there's a clip of about 2 minutes where he's debating Dr. Stotsky at the Board of Education, where he admits that these are not high-quality standards. They're essentially for community college ready. That's really what he's saying, not for selective colleges, right? And other authors and other advocates have made this clear in print and interviews over the last couple of years. They are not standards that are on par with the best countries in the world, right? So that's the academic quality, which is enormously important because the whole conversation on standards is about quality. That's what it's about, okay? The next piece of research we look at is the legality, because as I mentioned at the beginning, there are federal laws that prohibit the feds from doing what it is that they did in directly funding the PARCC test and directly getting states to sign on to Common Core through a federal grant program. So we enlisted the former general counsel and deputy general counsel of the U.S. Department of Education under the second Bush administration, the two highest ranking lawyers in the federal government under the previous administration. And what do these lawyers map out for us? Is that there are 3 federal laws that explicitly tells the feds that they may not do what they have in fact done under Common Core. Those federal laws are the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which was signed by Lyndon Johnson, the General Education Provisions Act of 1970, which was signed by Richard Nixon, and the enabling legislation that set up the U.S. Department of Education itself in 1979, which was signed by President Carter. So 2 of the 3 laws that were signed by U.S. presidents that prohibits the feds from doing what they're doing on Common Core were signed by Democrats. Folks, this is not a partisan issue. It's not a Tea Party issue. It's not an extreme issue. This is a rule of law issue. And you hear a lot of conversations these days about education is the civil rights issue of our era. It is the civil rights issue of our era. Having access to quality education is a civil right. But they also have to obey the Bill of Rights, too. And the Bill of Rights is pretty clear, again, articulated by our friend James Madison. 9th and 10th Amendments are pretty clear that the issues that are not clearly articulated by the U.S. Constitution, and there's no mention of K-12 education in the U.S. Constitution, that's the jurisdiction of the states. Okay? It's not just my opinion. There's an article in the back there, and he's done a couple of them, citing our research by George Will, generally regarded as one of the best respected syndicated columnists of the last 30 or 40 years. He says the U.S. Department of Education is essentially pretending that these laws that prohibit them from doing what they're doing don't exist, right? I have to say, as a father of 2 daughters, and understanding that the role of K-12 education is to inculcate citizenship, this is a horrible, horrible anti-civics lesson that we're teaching our kids. Because the people that are driving this conversation are violating federal laws. Okay? The final piece of research that we've looked at is the cost. Sandy made reference to it. Even though there's $250 million or more that have been spent by the other side advocating for this, most of the governors, most of the state budget offices, most of the boards of education, most of the departments of education, and the U.S. Department of Education itself, they didn't do a cost projection. And why do a cost projection? Because the fact is they know that someone else is going to pay for it. It's not going to be the Governors Association or the Council of Chief State School Officers that own the copyright on this. It's not going to be the U.S. Department of Education. It's going to be the states and localities. It's going to be us folks who are going to pay for this, right? So they didn't even bother to tell anybody. In most states, they didn't bother to have legislative hearings or even file bills. They didn't in Massachusetts. There were no hearings or bills or discussion about Common Core in any of the state legislatures. And as I mentioned, the race to the top was funded by the stimulus package, so there are never hearings in Congress about this. It totally has cut out both the state legislatures who pay for K-12 education and the Congress who make the laws in our society, completely cut out, right? So what is the cost projection that we've done tell us? It tells us that it's going to cost about $16 billion for the states and localities to align their textbooks, their technology, and their teacher professional development to the Common Core. For Massachusetts, after we've already spent well over $100 billion becoming #1 in the country and internationally competitive, we have to spend, according to our projection, another $350 million to adopt what I think are qualitatively lower standards. This is insanity, folks. This is insanity, right? The two of the 3 architects of the Ed Reform Law in 1993, Tom Birmingham and Bill Well, have been, both in 2010 when we adopted and even just a year or 2 ago, made clear that getting rid of MCAS would be madness. Given the record, right, you look on one side, this is the decision we have. On one side, we've got standards and tests that have led to improvements that are historic in every single measure of academic achievement known to K-12 education. And then on the other side, we have standards being developed by people that had no prior experience developing standards, and a PARCC test that is being developed by Achieving, who really had no experience whatsoever in student assessment. Folks, if you've got a child that's in the 3rd grade or the 5th grade or the 12th grade, which one are you going to bet your kid's future on? This one with all these results, or this one with no results? And the people that are driving it have no experience or evidence that their work has improved student achievement anywhere. I mean, this is a no-brainer, okay? The good news of all of this is that the more parents, and we've spoken in 25 states in the last 5 years, the more parents and state legislators and the general public find out about it. And you're seeing it in blue states and red states. You're seeing it with soccer moms. You're seeing it with parents in upper state New York. The more parents, and I would have to say it's specifically moms, when you look at the audience, it's usually 70% moms and grandmothers because they're trying to do the homework with their kids, but they're doing math, and it's insane, right? I've seen it. My daughter's in 2nd grade. I've seen it, right? It's not doing math equations. It's writing about math. My daughter calls it the Common Core math, cut the pizza in half math. You've all probably been having to do this kind of drawing all these pictures to do math. Total waste of time. Not how Massachusetts became #1 in the country and internationally competitive. So I've given you a ton of information. I'm really grateful for the folks who set up these events, especially one tonight. I appreciate your attention. I know it's a lot of information. It's a little bit like taking a sip of water from a open fire hydrant, but I appreciate your interest and look forward to any of the questions you might have afterwards. You're in for a real treat. Peg is fantastic. We've spoken, together at a bunch of events. You're really fortunate. These two ladies are wonderful to work with and incredibly knowledgeable about not only this topic, but lots of topics. And so I'm really grateful for this opportunity. Thanks again.
Before we bring up our last speaker, we are honored to have Senator Kennedy with us. Senator, did you want to come up and say a couple words? Speaking of politicians. Anywhere you want to be, anywhere you're comfortable.
That's not the camera, that's the camera.
That's the camera. Work the camera.
Do they pick up our voices? All right, do they? Okay. I'm Tom Kennedy. I'm your state senator. I cover 8 communities, ranging from northeastern Brockton all the way across Plymouth County down to Hanover. I'm merely one town from touching the sea. So I go from one side of Route 24, the west side of Route 24, to almost the sea, cutting the heart through the heart of beautiful Plymouth County. And I've been honored to be your state senator for the last 6 years. In the town of Halifax, a special meeting to me because my forebears came from Ireland in the 1820s to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and spent 3 or 4 generations to Halifax, to Nova Scotia, where I spent much of my summer childhood on the family farm. But Halifax, Massachusetts is older than Halifax, Nova Scotia. It may not be as large, but it's older and its history is that much deeper. And I'm a historian by interest in my education. But I have to say, my education on this subject is limited. I have never served on the committee on education. My many years at the State House have been on the Committee on Ways and Means and Committee on Public Service, the Committee on Consumer Protection and Election Laws. So I'm learning much about this from you, the constituents, from teachers, and from speakers like the panel that you're here, have here this evening. So I'm all ears. I'm all ears and I'm all eyes for you and for the pros and cons. But I've always said that there's more than one yardstick, more than one way to measure a child's education, and more than one yardstick in which to do it. When the welfare system was centered in town halls and local boards funded by the city and town budgets, the locals knew the individuals, they knew the families, they knew the status and the situation of those in need. And it worked fairly well. Long before my time, the brilliant idea was to give that all up, save the towns and the city's money, and bring it up to the state level. And the more bureaucrats involved, the more problems there are, and more abuse and waste there is. And we've seen that in the welfare system. Although it tries very hard, it's done marvelous work in many instances. It is riddled with abuse and riddled with cracks and problems. I serve as the chairman of the Committee on Post Audit and Oversight as a House of Representatives member, and we investigated problems and abuse in specific areas. And we could find a number of spots where millions of dollars could be and did get saved through our investigation. These ET cards are a perfect example of bureaucracy getting too big. And I fear the same is happening here. We're taking the state government, and which has been overseeing the school systems and the educational guidelines of this Commonwealth, trying very hard to do a good job, and it's worked. It's not perfect, but at least your local school committees and your school administrators in Beacon Hill they try to work hand in glove. But now we get the federal government, a huge bureaucracy with problems galore. They may have best intentions, but the higher up you go and the wider the span of influence, the more removed it is from the home base. And I believe that's why all of you are here, because you feel your voices and your concerns are not being met, not being heard, and are not being implemented the way you, the parents in the community want. So I'm here to promise I'll do all that I can in my capacity as your eyes, your ears, and your voice on Beacon Hill about this issue and any others that are important to the town of Halifax. So thank you very much for your attention. I have to say, I'm just recovering from 2 bouts of pneumonia. And the doctor has restricted me to only being out of bed a certain number of hours a day. And I feel like a caged lion. And so it's great to get out. But the clock is ticking for me to obey the doctor's orders, which I bend the rules to a certain extent. I try not to break them. So I apologize, but I can't stay for the rest of the evening.
We appreciate that you came. Thank you so much. Our final speaker tonight, Dr. Peg Luxick, has over 35 years' experience and has taught everything from preschool through college. She has written curriculum, evaluated curriculum, trained teachers, and has written several books on education issues. She worked for the U.S. Department of Education, where her task was to review and evaluate education reform initiatives. She was advisor to the Reagan Administration Commission on the Family. Please welcome Peg Luxick.
Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to do the commercial part of the program first because I'm going to be giving you a lot of information quickly, and while I'm talking, you'll go, and then you'll go home and say, what did she say? So to make that easier for you, I did CDs. They're available in the front at the end. The first one is called Invalid and Unreliable, and that actually takes the testing issues, all of the things that they say about the tests, because they tell you these tests are valid and reliable. Valid and reliable means something. They actually have real concrete definitions. So I took the definitions of valid and reliable and then compared them to the tests that are used in Common Core to show you how they fail at every measure. So if you want to be able to think about and look at and evaluate the test, look at invalid and unreliable. The second is called Should Our Children Be Standardized? This is a system that says that by fiat, all the children should learn the same thing at the same time in the same degree. In fact, when you debate it, which I have, secretaries of education have said, well, you know, like when the children of the military, which is kind of funny because we're a military family, I have a son in the Navy, go from school to school, all the schools have to be the same so that children can easily go from school to school to school. And so you hear that in the argument. So what happens in a classroom when everybody has to be the same? Well, let me just give you a brief demonstration. Stand up. You can sit for a while. This is vocal performance. When you can reach my standard, you can sit down, but you cannot sit down until you reach my standard. Are you ready? Luciano Pavarotti. Anybody who can sing like Pavarotti, considered one of the greatest tenors of the 20th century, can sit down. Nobody did. Soloist with the New York Met. Chorus member with the New York Met. Soloist, did somebody sit down back there? Yeah, okay. Yes, congratulations. Chorus member with the Regional Symphony. soloist with the church choir, sings in the church choir. You are a non-musical group. Sings in the shower and enjoys it. Can't carry a tune in a bucket. Can't find a bucket. Wow, that's terrible. Can't find the bucket. Okay, in this system, everyone has to meet the standard. But no teacher gets any points for any child getting one step beyond the standard. However, there are real punishments if everybody doesn't reach the standard. But you can set the standard where you want. Where are we going to put the standard? Now, in this group, you sat down and can't carry a bucket. But most people sit down and sings in the shower and enjoys it. I'm a teacher. I get no credit for children taking one step beyond that shower. But there are huge punishments if everybody doesn't get into the shower. So where am I going to spend all my time? With children immediately above and immediately below that standard. What about the child for whom the standard should have been Pavarotti? See, that child walked into the classroom already able to sing in the shower and enjoy it. So they already could pass the test. So they'll show up as a success. But did education succeed for them? No, it failed. And in fact, what the research shows is that when you move into this system, the children at the top report that there's a lot of pressure to do well on the test, but that they are basically ignored. And in fact, teachers surveyed across districts as large as Chicago said they felt really bad about ignoring those children, but they didn't have a choice. What happens to our can't find the bucket over here? Well, they get ignored as well. Because the teacher's trying to cut her losses. The teacher's trying to cut her losses. There's punishments if you don't get to that everybody being proficient. They know they can't, so they try to get as many people as they can, but ignore the bottom. Which is why when you look at the NAEP results for the last 15 years, what you find nationally is that the achievement gap, despite all the money that has been spent since we moved into standards-based education, the achievement gap hasn't changed at all. So should our children be standardized? Gives you that research so that you can talk about what happens in a classroom when we attempt to standardize children. This is the CD that also includes information on the new Advanced Placement U.S. History test that the College Board has put together and is now driving curriculum for our best and brightest 12th graders. This is a history course that teaches the American Revolution without mentioning Thomas Jefferson or John Adams, and teaches World War II without mentioning Dwight D. Eisenhower, D-Day, Adolf Hitler, or the Holocaust. So if you want to know what's in the new Advanced Placement U.S. History, should our children be standardized? If you want to know about the test, invalid and unreliable, we ask a donation of $10 because then I just circle that around to make more. And there in the front, you can see me at the end. And my light didn't go on. Now, when last week, you had folks here from the department, and so I watched the video, and while this is warming up, I was struck by the statement that the special assistant to the Commissioner of Education talked about the PARCC testing, and she said that the PARCC tests this year are in field testing. And that statement sort of struck me. When I was in grad school, you know, when you're a grad assistant, you're a slave. And so part of my duties were, I was the GA that worked in the psychometric testing clinic at the university. So one of my bachelor's is in special ed, and so I've administered the tests for IEPs and scored them and evaluated them and used them to place children. So I know, a little bit about the testing. So when she said that the tests were in field tests, I thought, I wonder if she's right. So I looked up the PARCC, and as you can see, and boy, that's not really very... And in the spring of 2015, they are, in fact, in field tests. What is a field test? A field test is an experiment. It means we don't know if it's going to work or not. It's experiment, research, or trial conducted under actual use conditions instead of in a laboratory. Which means that the tests your children are taking this year, they're experiments.
Guinea pig.
Laboratories. Now, Pearson, which is the company that has the contract for PARCC, they have a contract from the federal, through the consortium, which uses federal money, for about $240 million a year. There are 11 states in PARCC. Each of those 11 states have also contracted with Pearson. So they're making hundreds of millions of dollars on this test. But I guess that wasn't enough for them. Because since they are field testing in your schools, they are using your teachers as the proctors of their exams instead of paying them. So you, the taxpayer, are paying the proctors for the field test for a for-profit company that isn't even an American company. They're British. They're headquartered in the UK. And your children are the test subjects. Now, one of my sisters is a nurse, and she used to work in one of the drug companies, and she actually worked in the clinic, you know, when they test new drugs. When they bring people in to test the new drugs, those people get paid. In universities, where they're always testing things, you know, in universities, they either put signs up on the university and you can go and volunteer, or you get paid, or you get dinner. But your kids, they were forced. There's a word for mandatory volunteers. We outlawed it in this country in the 1860s, as I recall, except when it comes to the children. Because instead of Pearson having to pay proctors and having to pay test subjects, they're using the tax dollars of the people in Massachusetts to basically increase their profit margin. That doesn't sound right to me. Well, what are they doing with these tests?
I just have a question.
Yes.
Is this the teacher, she was from Abington?
Abington who? Are you in Abington, Massachusetts?
When she was from the department last week?
No,
She was talking about,
it was Dr. LaCroix, did you say? She was the special assistant to the commissioner who said it was a field test.
okay.
It was not a teacher, or not.
Oh,
She is
okay.
the special assistant to the
Elizabeth
commissioner of
Gonzalez
education in your
is the name
state.
of the teacher from Abington, you're probably.
Okay, she was referring that her tests were, you know, it really wasn't affiliated with Park because they were from a different publishing house. And when I looked it up, Pearson had actually bought the testing rights
Yes.
years
Years ago.
before. And she's like, I've never heard of Pearson. They're not in, you know, your school. And
Yes,
if
they
I wasn't in the moment, I would have been able to look it up and have said,
It's Pearson.
they bought your,
Yes. Pearson has bought out a
they bought
bunch
the
of
Abington
testing
School
companies.
System publishing rights.
They've bought a bunch of them, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's, this is from Chicago, where they were also working on it. And Peter Bavis is a assistant superintendent in Chicago, and he said, in part of his testimony to the Illinois State Board, that the Park test is neither valid nor reliable as a measure. The reason is that it has never been given to a large population. So we, the people of Illinois, which is also one of the field test states, are paying to have a private testing company norm their instruments on the backs of Illinois students, just like you're doing here in Massachusetts. So you're paying for them to develop their product, for which they will then charge you. Hang on till I'm done, you can ask
I
anything.
just
you
wanted to
want.
make one clarification. The Halfax School Committee opted out of Park field testing, so it's not actually happening in our community.
Oh, good for you. Congratulations. Okay. Now, as the tests were being developed, there were a number of seminars that were held by the publishing companies about the issues and how to develop the tests and what they were doing in the tests. This was one of the seminars. It was given in October of 2010. Called Psychometric Issues, Opportunities, and Challenges for Next Generation Assessments. And what they were doing was training people on how to use both the Park and the Smarter Balance. And they talked about psychometrics, because this is a psychometric test. And they defined psychometrics as the design, administration, and interpretation of quantitative tests for the measurement of psychological variables, such as intelligent achievement, aptitude, and personality traits. That is not an achievement test. They went on to talk about the psychometric approaches both in the Smarter Balance, SBAC is Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, and PARC is the Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness for College and Career Year PARC. If you look, they're committed to industry best practices, standards for educational and psychological testing. So this is not an achievement test. This is a test that's something very different than the old Iowa tests. These are psychometric tests. and they define them as testing of things like personality traits. In New York, which you probably heard is the hotbed of opposition to the test, in New York this year, they have, and they're still counting, a little over 200,000 kids opt out of the test. I was actually speaking in Long Island, and before the event, I had dinner in a little pizza shop, and a gentleman walked in with his kids, and we got to chatting, and it turned out he was the assistant principal at the local school. 74% of the kids in that school opted out of the test, including his. So in New York, this is from the Washington Post. Now, the tests are supposed to be, the PARCC test is supposed to be shrouded in secrecy, and you're not allowed to have copies of it. In fact, there were actually, it went viral. There was an email about students who, in their own private accounts after school, started talking about how they didn't like the test, and Pearson found the kids and contacted the superintendent and told them that the kids had to be punished because they were violating the security of the PARCC test. But in New York, the teachers decided they were so frustrated with what they were seeing and what was happening that they created an anonymous blog in which they could share both their concerns and information about the test. So the blog was written about in the Washington Post, and a principal wrote, "The 3 days of the English Language Arts exam have been torture. I only had 23 students opt out, and I had at least 3 times that number in tears. If we were permitted to talk about the content, it would be over so fast. Folks would be horrified at the vocabulary, the reading levels, and the ambiguity of the questions. I, the teacher, was unable to answer at least 25% of them." Another teacher, Jessica Wallen, wrote, "After all year, her students have been so proud of their academic growth. I've been congratulating them so much as of lately, they've blown me away. Now they were in tears, and I heard, I thought I was smart. I guess not. I'm stupid. I can't even take a test." Well, why would they think that? This is a passage from a 6th grade test. It was given in day 3. The article was entitled "Nimbus Clouds, Mysterious, Ephemeral, and Now Indoors." It was from the Smithsonian Magazine. One of the paragraphs in the article, remember these are 6th graders, "As a result, the location of the cloud is an important aspect, as it is the setting for his creation and part of the artwork. In his favorite piece, Nimbus d'Aspremont, the architecture of the d'Aspremont Linden Castle in Rechem, Belgium, plays a significant role in the feel of the picture. The contrast between the original castle and its former use as a military hospital and mental institution is still visible," he writes. "You could say the spaces function as a plinth for the work." So how many of you know what a plinth is? That's a 6th grade test. Is it any wonder the children were crying? That they felt like they were stupid? A plinth is an architectural term. You know when you see a Greek column, the thing at the bottom? That's a plinth. Now you know. The article went on to talk about 4th graders being required to write about the architectural design of roller coasters and why cables are used instead of chains. Remember, the test is on a computer. So the 4th graders had to type their answers. Do you know what 4th graders can't do? Type. So they had to hunt and peck in a timed test. A 6th grade passage from That Spot by Jack London, which included words such as beaten curs, absconders of justice, surmise, save our cabin, and let's maroon him. A 3rd grade test from Drag Racer that had a grade level for reading of 5.9 and an interest level of 9th through 12th grade. The 8th grade test required 13-year-olds to read articles on playground safety. Vocabulary included bowdlerized, habituation techniques, counterintuitive, orthodoxy, circuitous, risk-averse culture, and litigious. One of the articles, they gave an example, and the excerpt said, "Paradoxically, we posit that our fear of children being harmed by mostly harmless injuries may result in more fearful children at increased levels of psychopathology." Can you imagine an English language learner child trying to figure that out? What about a special ed kid trying to figure that out? No wonder the children are responding the way that they're responding. And who will be scoring? Well, Wright from Pearson in the article talked about how Pearson is hiring folks. So they're going to the Kelly, which is a temp agency. They actually went on to Craigslist. So I looked it up. This is right from the Pearson website, and again, the Washington Post quotes it. This is what Pearson says. If you are looking for a job in the area of test development, there's some good news. Pearson, the world's largest education company, is advertising for test item writers, and you apparently don't have to have a bachelor's degree, says the Washington Post. Below is what the Pearson website says. Item writers. Item writers construct passages and/or develop test questions for educational assessments. A bachelor's degree is preferred, but not required. With experience in item writing, teaching, or developing state standards curriculum or tests or test preparation activities, opportunities exist in the following content areas. These are high-stakes tests. They can be used, and the goal is to have them be used for children evaluation, promotion, graduation, whether they're placed in remediation or can move forward, and eventually teacher evaluation. And you don't even need a bachelor's degree to write the question. You can ask me anything you want at the end.
I just want to go back one slide.
Sure.
I thought I saw something about them hiring people for 13 bucks an hour.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to.
Can you fine tune that, because I can't
Sure.
read it.
blurred.
Oh, no, I didn't even see the.
Is that better?
11:50.
There's two. Kelly Services is $11.50. Pearson itself was making $13. It depended on who hired you. And the scorers, test evaluators needed, and they put this is from Kelly Services from Craigslist, Indianapolis. That's where they looked for test scores. If you have a bachelor's degree or higher, not necessarily in education, we need your help to evaluate student assessment tests. Come apply. For more information and to schedule an appointment, visit our website. Please be prepared to spend 2 hours going through the application, and I know that's grammatically incorrect, but that's what it said. So, orientation process, bring 2 forms of identification and proof of your degree. So these are the people who will be scoring the assessments. Now, how the assessments are scored and what these assessments mean, that's really important. So let's start with valid and reliable. Valid. I am testing what I say I'm testing and nothing else. So if it's a multiplication test, you wouldn't expect to see a question that says spell cat. When we test in other areas, people go to great lengths to eliminate all the other variables. So I told you about my sister who works for the drug company. So if you were going to be a volunteer to test blood pressure medicine, you would come in and you would get the biggest physical you ever got in your whole life. Because they want everybody to be basically the same physiologically. So they don't have people that weigh 100 pounds and people who weigh 300 pounds in the same thing. My husband has huge problems with his blood pressure. He fights to keep it at, just the basic thing. My resting blood pressure is 90/60. They always ask me, are you okay? So I'm just working, you must be really calm. Obviously, we couldn't be in the same test because we're not alike at all. So the first thing that happens is you have this physical to make sure that everybody's the same. The second thing they say is, we want you to come anywhere from 3 to 7 days before the test starts. Why? So you don't walk in the day of the test having had 10 beers the night before, because that would mess up the results. So they want to make sure everybody has the same diet, that everybody's medication is controlled, that everybody had the same sleep structure. So that the only thing that changes is the thing that we're testing. Now let's move that to a classroom with children. There's no way to control what the children bring to the situation. Maybe they're sick with an undiagnosed illness, but you don't know that. Maybe their dog died last night, but you don't know that. Maybe there was upheaval in their family. There's a divorce, there's something wrong. Maybe there was something wrong in the neighborhood. An ambulance was running up the street, so it was all noise. Maybe they didn't get breakfast or supper the night before. All of those things will affect the result of the test, but you don't know which children they are. In any big testing population, on average about 10% of the kids will have one of those interfering factors. However, as the socioeconomic level of the children goes down, that percentage goes up. Because children who live in poverty are more likely to have an undiagnosed illness, or upheaval in their family, or poor nutrition. I was in New York, in Rochester, which is one of the poorest communities in New York, and a teacher, in speaking, told about how the little one that was supposed to take the test saw her mother get shot and killed on the porch of their home in a drive-by shooting. And you're going to give her an achievement test? Are you out of your mind? But nobody knows which children they are either. It is not an accident that if you take the results of the test and you put them right beside the poverty levels of the districts, the numbers are almost exactly parallel. So are we testing achievement or are we testing poverty? And because of Common Core, because these are such high stakes, because your state doesn't have the opportunity to maneuver around and to let kids work around it, because everything is mandated, and because the federal government is stepping in and saying, no, you can't really adapt, and we're taking away, the U.S. Department of Education is saying we're going to start moving away, disallowing states from doing alternative assessments for kids with special needs, that we're going to start moving to everybody be the same. Children of poverty will move even further behind because they'll be placed in remediation. Not because necessarily they couldn't do the math, but because you were measuring the fact that their dog died last night. But since you don't know which children they are, you can't fix it. Now let's add teacher evaluation, which is the Common Core plan, that teachers will be evaluated based on the test. And as Dr. Satsu said, it was value-added measurement. So the teachers are given, it's like a target. Your kids have to get this score. One teacher, and I think he was in Colorado, said that his value-added measurement was, I'm making a number up, 286. But the highest score the kids in his class could get was a 283. So he couldn't meet the measurement. So he couldn't be rated effective. But if children in poor districts don't do as well because you're measuring poverty instead of achievement, in this system, when it's fully implemented, their teachers won't be able to get a good evaluation either. Which means those districts will lose the most experienced teachers. Yet those are the districts who most need the most experienced teachers. But those districts will lose them. So the children take a step back because their progress is slowed down, and then they get less experienced teachers. In many cities, they're being replaced with what are called Teach for America volunteers. People who have 5 weeks of training, and if they stay for 2 years, they can get student loans forgiven or some other perk. So that it's a rolling circle of 2 years and 2 years and 2 years and 2 years. Or they get teachers right out of college. So kids who most need the experienced teachers will be the least likely to get them, but because they're still in poverty, those teachers won't get a good evaluation either. So they will always get the least experienced teachers. You know, we use the word discrimination a lot when we shouldn't. This is a time when we should. These tests are ugly. This system is ugly. You can't standardize children. There is no such thing as one size fits all. You can't mandate achievement. I live in Pennsylvania, and so I actually debated the secretarial. And she talked all about, all the schools will be the same. And I said, okay, so, if everybody has to walk at the same speed, don't you walk at the speed of the slowest person in the group? Because they can't speed up. But the quick person can slow down. You heard about A Nation at Risk, the report by the Reagan administration on the status of education, and they actually talked about this, the whole idea of minimum competency. And what they said was, this is a mistake, because the minimum will become the maximum, and education for everyone will go down. And that was in 1983. So this was not a surprise. It was predicted. But see, here in Massachusetts, you're lucky. In my state, in New York, in Idaho, when the state board said so, it was done. No district had a choice. But you do. In your state, you have a choice. I beg you, take it. Protect the children in front of you. They can't do it over. They can't come back and be 6 or 7 or 8 again. Do not let a British company use your children to increase their profits. Thank you.
Just a couple things before we take questions. I have a handout here. The Governor Baker has directed Paul Sagan and the Board of Ed Chair to hold a series of public hearings around the state, which will solicit feedback from educators, parents, students, and local officials in the park, examine the real-world impact of Common Core standards. The dates are here, so I actually take when you go. The closest one is June 10th at Bridgewater State. It's from 4 to 7, but there are a few others, so please take that. And if you would like more information about Common Core mailed to you, you could fill this out. I'll leave it here at the back desk. And if you're asking a question, we just ask that you stand up and speak nice and loudly so we can all hear. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yeah. Who wants to go first? Who wants to, Jamie, do you want to go first?
It's a general question. Do you want me to stand up? Yes.
Stand up.
Yes, stand up.
In your big room voice.
I feel discriminated against because of the bucket.
Because we're singing.
If I was still teaching, I taught 7th grade science for 34 years, and I've been retired for 10. But it would seem to me that if I were a teacher today, I would want to say to the kids, hey, go home and tell your parents, you don't have to take this test. Isn't that right? But what the question is, would that teacher get in trouble?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they are. As a matter of fact, and I know Sandra has the same experience, teachers are told don't come to presentations like this in many states, insubordinates written in their file. We were in Delaware together, and the teachers, they had to fill out questions, and what they wrote was, please help us. I was in New York, and I was in a room filled with teachers, and they all said, we were told we're not allowed to do anything that would let parents, even though they have the right to opt out. In West Virginia, children are told if they opt out, they'll be suspended. So there's a huge, and in Delaware the same. So there's a huge pushback both on the teachers and the children.
One thing I think is important to understand, so under the previous standards and under MCAS, the teacher evaluations were not connected to those. What you're seeing with this Common Core, PARC, kind of race to the top model is national standard, national test, PARC. In fact, PARC has also been instructed by the U.S. Department of Education to develop curricular materials, which is also a violation of the law. Teacher evaluations, right? The teacher evaluations connected, if the state adopts PARC in November, that really locks in teachers in a way that had previously not happened in Massachusetts. It's a significant change, and I always use the example of, how this is going to, how it's going to essentially dumb things down. Well, it's a dramatic example, but out in Pittsfield is where Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick, right? A teacher in Pittsfield, the English teacher in Pittsfield couldn't teach Moby Dick. Moby Dick is not in the Common Core. It will not be on the PARC. And the teacher evaluations, if Massachusetts adopts PARC, will be connected with PARC, right? So what do you think the teacher's going to do? It's not on the standard, it's not in the test. She's not going to teach it, right? Even though it was written in the town that she teaches it. And that's an example of how this is going to end up incentivizing a lot of bad practices, and it's going to box teachers in. It's one of the big reasons why, and I said earlier, this is not a partisan issue. The previous head of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, Paul Toner, was in favor of Common Core. The current president, Barbara Mataloni, is opposed to Common Core, right? So this is cutting across a lot of different demographics. It's cutting across different parties, but what you're seeing in New York and in New Jersey and a lot of places is not only the opt-out, but you're also seeing a lot of pushback from the teachers themselves, and it's because they're getting boxed in too.
Why don't you stand up?
How you doing? Jason Conroy. I'm sorry, I think I'm at town meeting. Kind of a multi-part question here, and just a little bit of background. My parents were both Boston City school teachers, and they actually sent me and my two brothers to private school because they weren't happy with the education system that they were deeply involved in, that they were very dedicated to. And my father, when he retired, he was a young man, I think he was 59 years old, and he said, I don't want to teach to a test. And that was his thing, because he'd been teaching since, the late 60s, early 70s. He didn't want to teach to a test. But they sent us to a private school, and my question is, a couple of questions is this, and it goes to kind of class, I was lucky enough to go to Sacred Heart. My parents scraped and, worked very hard to send us to a private school. What are private schools doing in terms of PARCC testing and other testing like that?
In Massachusetts, they are not required, if they're not public schools, to administer a PARCC test. However, Catholic schools in Massachusetts, and about half of all of the diocesan Catholic schools across the country, are teaching to Common Core standards. There may be a few states in which they also have to take the state-mandated tests, but not in Massachusetts. They're not allowed.
They're teaching to...
They're teaching to Common Core standards, and then whatever they choose to take. They're not required, because they're not public schools, to use the whole full set. And they have chosen on their own. This has been either a Catholic superintendent or someone in charge of instruction in the diocesan schools.
Yeah.
Independent Catholic schools have their own independence to choose what they want, and they tend at the high school level not to be adopting, as far as I'm told, Common Core standards, particularly in math, because it's one of their attractions to say, we will teach Algebra 1 in grade 8 and get you to Calculus 1, which makes them attractive to a parent with academic ambitions for their kids.
Right.
But in Massachusetts, all private schools, sectarian or not, cannot give the state-mandated test for public schools. It's simply not allowed.
Okay. Basically my question is, class welfare is basically what I'm looking at.
In what way?
In the fact of, I'm going to sit down for a second, but my concern is I know in Massachusetts, we've had we were the #1 in multiple times across the country. And with PARCC testing now, we're being basically dumbed down. Our kids are being dumbed down.
Well, it's not the test alone that's
It's
dumbing down.
what the
It's
teachers
what
are
the teachers are teaching in the classroom. If your standards don't go higher than Algebra 2,
Right.
then you will not have a textbook to use in math, in theory, that goes higher than Algebra 2, because it won't be aligned with Common Core.
So my point goes to this, and the reason I asked about private schools is private schools are not...
They can do what they want.
They can do what they want.
Yeah.
And they could teach to a higher level if they want.
If they want to.
And there's a huge amount of pushback in the private schools as parents of private school students are saying, what are you doing? So throughout the country, whether they're like diocesan or like in the Midwest, the school system is actually Lutheran. So there's all different religious based, and then there are independent schools. Parents are pushing back and beginning to have an effect. But many of the private schools who were not required chose to do it and are now getting pushback from their parents. So if your kids are in a private school, you should find out and then
complain.
I can't afford private school, but my question is this, is the people that have the ability to send their children to private school or have the financial means.
May or may not get a better education. That is the answer to your question. They may or may not, depends on what's in the private school. And one of the bizarre responses of people who run private schools is those who are adopting Common Core. Many of our students will go back to the public schools, so we want to prepare them. I've heard this from Catholic school people who have asked their own administrators, why they're going with Common Core, because at the elementary school level, yes, many children may go to a parochial school, but then they go back to the public schools for secondary. So we want to prepare them for the public schools they're going back to. And the Catholic parent is saying, is that the purpose of a Catholic school then? To prepare? And this could be asked of any private school.
There's a couple of points quick points that I'd like to make. So the first thing is that the Archdiocese, prior to Common Core, and they have adopted it, the Archdiocese of Boston has adopted the Common Core. So Catholic schools, generally speaking, in Massachusetts are using Common Core. Prior to Common Core, they adopted Sandy standards, the Massachusetts,
not my standards,
well, the previous Massachusetts standards. And what we know from the few measures that they have in common is that the Archdiocese schools were outperforming the Massachusetts public schools. So as well as Massachusetts has done, the Archdiocese was doing better. All right? And what it shows is that while the test, and I would argue...
They weren't using MCAS.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
We have to be careful about
They
that.
did not use the MCAS, but the basis of their success gets back to what I said in my remarks, which is this is a conversation about academic quality, right? And the evidence from even the Archdiocese schools is when they adopted the previous Massachusetts standards, they did very well. The other thing that it's very important to highlight here is that unlike the event that was the other night, where the people from the department were here and they wouldn't debate, and we've seen this not only in Massachusetts, but all over the country. The advocates will not debate, okay? Peg and I may not share the same opinion on testing, but we engage in a public discussion about these things. We actually think it's healthy, that the free exchange of ideas with people who disagree is a healthy exercise in a democracy. So I just encourage you to contrast what you may have heard the other night from the department, who will say, hey, we don't want to be on the same stage with people that disagree with us. I've spoken with Peg at a bunch of events in the last several months, and people of goodwill can debate these things publicly. And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge about the event that Linda and others have put on.
Why don't you stand up?
I have two specific questions and one general question. Massachusetts did receive $250 million Race to the Top funds to adopt the Common Core. If the Common Core is extracted from the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, what are the ramifications of that?
I'm saying, what is your question
There's
again?
no provision in the law to pay. First of all, the Race to the Top money timeline is over.
It's been
You
used
did
up.
what it did, and there's no provision for payback, so
It's
not.
been used up.
Okay. And also you mentioned that Common Core is illegal on 3 different counts, and I forget what you cited specifically. I'm wondering, is there current litigation about Common Core, and where does it stand in the courts?
So that's a great question. I mean, Pioneer is, we enlisted attorneys to do the research. We're a research organization. We're not a grassroots organization. We, generally speaking, don't file litigation. There are governors that have, Governor Jindal in Louisiana, for example, who was previously for Common Core and is now against it and has sued the feds. A lot of that is being worked out, but to my knowledge in Massachusetts, there is no active litigation against the feds for, and part of it is that you have to have what the lawyers call standing. You have to have a school committee, a board of education, a group of parents that have standing on this topic, that they've been grieved.
You have to have plaintiffs.
You get a plaintiff.
And the plaintiffs have to be students, and so far, they haven't been able to find students who are damaged by Common Core yet. You have to understand that these other court cases that existed had students. In fact, Brockton students were the students in the last court case. I forget what its name was, but it was against Driscoll at the Department of Ed. But you have to have Hancock versus Driscoll. But in order to have a court case, there have to be damaged plaintiffs. And since Common Core has not had testing long enough in place for anyone to be able to claim or show abuse, there has been no court case on that basis yet.
One additional thing on the money. So it's true, in 2010, Massachusetts got $250 million in Race to the Top. That was over 4 years. If you do the math on it, and we've got about 1 million students in Massachusetts, it ends up being about 33 cents per kid per day. This is barely pays for milk, right? Doesn't pay for milk, right? And that money is gone. So So it was really one-time money, and it is completely gone. The other thing that's important to remember, as I mentioned, we have spent over 100 billion, that's billion with a B, over the last 20 years, okay? Massachusetts at the state and local level annually is spending about $9 billion. So in the scheme of things, $250 million it's a lot of money, right? But a lot of money, it's not a lot of money, and it's over 4 years in comparison to the $9 billion we are spending annually. It's a drop in the bucket, folks. Previous governor sold us out pretty cheaply for what has been the most historic ed reform effort in the last 50 years in this country.
I just have a general question, if you don't mind. There's been a lot of discussion about standardized testing, and I've never been a big fan of standardized testing, but in lieu of that, how can the No Child Left Behind initiative have any sort of accountability if there's not some testing to go with it? I'm not speaking in favor of PARC or MCAS, and again, I have issues with standardized testing, but what is the alternative?
We used to do it in this country. We used to do achievement testing. You took one of, you probably all took them, the Iowa, the Metropolitan, the California, or the Stanford. The Stanford was the gold standard of testing. Those tests were not high stakes for the children. They didn't count toward promotion, graduation, and what they did was, first of all, it was pure achievement. What you got back, think about the paper, you got one piece of paper back. On the bottom of this side, it would have a list of this was addition, computation, and you got it right or wrong. So you knew what your kid did and which specific skills to work on. Then you got the percentages across the top, 98, 95, 87, how your kid compared to the country. Then you got a grade level. Remember, you were in 4th grade, but maybe Johnny was operating at the 5.9 grade level. Did you ever wonder how you figured out 5.9? Because all of those tests tested, if you were in 4th grade, it meant 3 years down and 3.5 years up. So they could take the questions and say, you stopped answering them right here. And that was the grade level. The teacher's evaluation was kind of a group thing, because every kid in Mrs. Blankenschmiel's 3rd grade class didn't have a bad day on the same day. But as long as, if it was a 4th grade teacher, if the middle of her class was in 4th grade, she was doing fine. So you're understanding where there were kids above and kids below. These tests don't go above. Yes, and that's actually what it's called in the documents, maximum content. So there's a ceiling. So the teacher, we don't even measure above, which lowers everything. And those tests gave us diagnostic information in a timely fashion. They gave you information you could evaluate your school, your district, your state, and your nation. Parents knew exactly what was happening, so you got everything you needed and you got a realistic way to evaluate the teachers. And the PARC test this year, according to the contracts, is going to cost $24 a kid. The Iowa test, which is still in business this year, is $9 a head. Big difference, huh?
What's the MCAS test? Because I had asked that question and they made it seem that
You mean the cost?
the cost per student for
It's about the same. It's about
Okay.
the same.
They made it seem like it was going to be astronomically cheaper to go with
No.
PARC.
I mean, I think the thing, he's raised a really important question. So there's going to be a test, right? It's either going to be MCAS, which is what has been our graduation requirement, or it's going to be PARC. Both under state law, as of state law as of right now, we have the MCAS test. Under federal law, states have to have a test, right? So we're going to have a test. That's the No Child Left Behind law, which frankly I was not a big fan of. And what we've seen is that Massachusetts started its ed reform in 1993. The testing began in the late 90s, early 2000s, and what happened is that Massachusetts was so far, we'd already been in ed reform for a decade, right, before No Child Left Behind came along. The reality is that a lot of No Child Left Behind didn't apply to Massachusetts. We were so far ahead already, okay? What the No Child Left Behind law has done, though, and I think actually Massachusetts did a pretty good job early on. We would test reading in the 3rd grade, we would test math in the 4th grade, reading again in the 5th grade. We alternated subjects by year. Under No Child Left Behind, you have to test every subject every year. So it's a lot more testing, okay? Under PARC, the plan is sort of the No Child Left Behind plan. There'll be significantly more testing under PARC than even what we have right now under MCAS. The thing that is, worth emphasizing again We've adopted Common Core, okay? Over time, we could get out of it. If we adopt Park, Common Core is locked in. That conversation would be over. The decision before us, and it's before the Board of Ed in November. So if there's one thing you take away tonight, get in contact with the governor and the governor's office and the Secretary of Education and tell them you don't want to do Park. And the reason why you don't want to do Park is this. First of all, we're in a consortia with 12 other states. Park started off with 24 states, and over the last 2 years, they've lost half their membership. This year, districts could pick between doing MCAS or Park. Half the states in half the districts in Massachusetts opted not to do Park, and only a quarter of the district's high schools opted to do Park. So even in Massachusetts, where our Commissioner of Education is pushing hard to get us to do Park, people in the state are divided. You know this from your own community who didn't do Park for this year. That's the big discussion ahead of us over the next several months, is whether we're going to have Park or not. And it's a crucial, crucial decision, because all the things that you heard tonight, if you don't like them, they all get locked in if we do Park. That's what Peg said. We still have a choice. Many states, New York, New Jersey, don't. They're doing Park. We can opt out of this. But we've got to have folks like you reach out and make clear to the governor, because he could withdraw us from this Park consortium through an executive order. You got to make clear, if you don't like this, you got to tell him. Okay?
And I go even further. There are two things people can do at the local level. Opting out is one, because if it's more than 5%, if it's below 95% participation, the test results are invalid, whatever test, state or federal you take. So opting out is one good way to at least eliminate the use of the results of the test. Secondly, you can do what you are planning to vote on this week in Halifax, and there are about 5 other communities that have done it. You put questions on your ballot or in a town meeting that you vote on, an article in the warrant, that expresses your opinion. It's non-binding, but if enough towns and cities do it, and if they get their own high school students to participate and learn what civic participation is, that is another way to send the right message to a Secretary of Education that isn't listening, a governor who isn't listening, and a state legislature that may not be listening. There is nothing that says any of these people are going to do anything. Right now, the Commissioner of Education has already told all superintendents that he and the board are going with Park next year. It's a done deal. They've already made a decision in advance of the vote of the board. How that could happen, you'd have to ask them. But I saw the letter to the superintendent of Brookline that was sent out to all the members of the school committee. And last October, Superintendent Lupini said, we will be changing to Park next year. Done deal. So what is this board voting on next year if last year the superintendents already knew they were making the change? There's something fishy going on. In addition, the state legislature has already voted a line item in the budget for next year for the increased costs of the testing. It's already there. They've got it planned. They've already got the money coming from the state legislature's budget to be voted on next year. So the only way you can get your voice heard is by basically sabotaging the tests, by opting your kids out, by putting non-binding resolutions on every ballot you can, town after town, until the message sinks through to the local administration that they're not going to have much cooperation from the parents in their own town. I don't see any other way out. Yeah.
If one was to put on a conspiratorial hat, pull back the curtain, what is the motive behind the people pulling levers for this? I mean, it also...
We don't know what their motives are except what they tell us.
I mean, that sounds like a dumbing down of...
I mean, look, this is not a conspiracy theory.
No, he's talking about them.
Yeah, I know, I'm just saying...
Not you.
I know, I'm just saying it's not a conspiracy theory.
I believe you.
He's asking, why are they doing it?
I know, but so if you go to the Gates website, the Gates Foundation website, all of the people that we've talked about, these various entities, they have a search engine. You can just type in, you know, Achieve Inc., and you'll see it pop up who has funded them. It's not,
Equity and academic expectations, they make claims.
Yeah, but
These
it's
are the
not,
things
it's
they
not,
talk
it's not
about.
hidden. It's not hidden. They've
but
been very
talk
tricky about the way in which they have done this, and they've been pretty deceitful about it. But, you know, they have not, it's not hidden, is what I'm saying. It's actually, and I think they're just kind of hoping that no one pays any attention.
But why? He's asking why.
The ultimate
Why
reason
is it that they say that it's one of the reasons, you have to look at their reasons and then think how rational they are. It's important for Massachusetts teachers to know how Mississippi kids are doing. Well, I mean, would you find that useful if you were a teacher in Massachusetts? I don't know. But you could ask yourself that, and you talked about the military
What they
kids.
say in their documents over and over and over again is that the purpose of education in this system is workforce development. That you have the skills you need to do your job and no other skills. There's a document written in May 2013 actually called, What Does It Mean to Be College and Work Ready? It's written by the National Center for Education and the Economy, which is a federal think tank. And they say that this means ready to go to a community college, middle school math, Algebra 1 by the end of your sophomore year in high school, because the document says less than 5% of the careers out there need Algebra 2 or beyond, so it is a waste, and that is their words, to teach it. This is the skills you need. It's called workforce development. So instead of education being about enlightening a child, it's about creating a workforce. They're very open about it. There's actually a commission, it's from the U.S. Department of Labor, called the Secretary's Commission on Achieving Necessary Skills. It was written in the 1990s, but it's driving education in our schools today. And it talks about functional literacy, being able to read what you need to read to do your job, which is why they've eliminated literature, and the math that you need to do your job. So it's a redefinition of education to workforce development. And they're very open about it. And our time is
Can I just say one thing? Ohio has recently, they passed their act, it's Act 597, and they have now adopted the pre-Massachusetts Common Core standards, and they are going back to what we had in place before Common Core, and they are also going back with our old testing standards. Ohio, it's their Act 597. They're going to continue because they're obligated to, for the Common Core, to finish up the 2014 with them. And as of 2015 going on, they're going to use our pre-Common Core Massachusetts standards.
It's an encouraging development, but the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, is in favor of Common Core, and he has not signed that yet. I think it's not likely to happen.
But they're trying to really push for
trying
it.
to.
It's their Act 597 that.
We have one more question over here from our school committee members.
Do the current Massachusetts curriculum frameworks
Yeah.
got us up to calculus? Is that in the current Massachusetts curriculum framework?
Pre-calculus was, a set of standards for pre-calculus was in the 2000 document. It wasn't required for high school competency determination. In other words, if you didn't get to take pre-calculus, you couldn't be forbidden a high school diploma. But the standards were there so that all math departments knew what the content of a pre-calculus course was. But the standards for pre-calculus are not in Common Core at all.
Are they in the current Massachusetts frameworks? That's the
No,
question.
because the current Massachusetts framework is Common Core.
It's not just based on Common Core. Do we have the current?
It is.
Because I've seen it online.
The thing you have to remember.
And my next question, could you please let me finish?
Sure.
Is it still up to districts what we teach and when we teach it?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
That's my point in this.
Yes,
okay?
you are right, that you can offer it, but they're not in the Common Core standards. And what is on the website is, for the most part, Common Core. I've looked at them. I was on the board. I know what was
I have looked
adopted.
at them. After you were here last year, I spent a lot of time looking at those standards. And I'm very disappointed to hear the same rhetoric that I heard last year.
Please show me which standards you're talking about.
Thank you.
So, So let me just say something here. The point of national standards, right? The point of national standards is uniformity across the nation, right? That's the point of it.
But that's not what we...
Let me finish.
This is a model course.
Massachusetts is part of a park consortium. The other states in park are Arkansas and New Mexico, some of the lowest performing states in the union. Whatever Massachusetts adds to Common Core will not be on the park test that we share in common, which is the point of national standards and national tests. If there's only one thing you take out tonight, remember this. Massachusetts is now, if we adopt the park, we are in a testing consortia with Arkansas and New Mexico, the two lowest performing states in the union. We are just one of 12 states in that. Under MCAS, we own the table. With park, we're just one of 12. And guess what? There's a lot more of the low performers in the park than there are the states like Massachusetts. So it will obviously pull things down. But whatever they try to add into the standards will not be on the park test.
Sorry, what's your question?
Will it be on the park test?
No, it will not be
No,
on the
that's
park
right.
test.
It won't.
It won't.
That's exactly what I just said.
That's the main point.
It won't be.
They won't
MCAS only tests till 10th grade. So,
Yes,
Yes.
MCAS tested algebra and geometry.
No, it did not.
Standards for 9 and 10. I
no,
know
it
I
did
can.
not.
Okay, can you explain to me then if
That's our MCAS test.
if MCAS was such a bad test, right?
No, that
and,
isn't the
and,
issue.
and if the standards weren't good, why is it that we were number one on pretty much every measure of academic achievement?
If you go back and look at the information that's available.
I have
Okay,
looked
our
at that
MCAS
information.
testing.
That is not Common Core
graduation re-
standards. And they will not be
Exactly. They're not
assessed,
Common Core standards, they're Massachusetts standards.
but they're not going to be assessed on the park test. That's
And
the
calculus
problem.
never was part of MCAS.
But they're not going to be assessed by park, which is going to be the state test. That's what's going to determine college readiness in grade 11.
I'm
And
not saying I'm for park.
no, that isn't the issue. I'm trying to clarify a fact. Those model pathway integrated math standards are not on parks. They're not being
No, they're
assessed.
not.
And they will not be part of the college readiness exam in grade 11 that will determine whether students are college ready or not. That is the huge difference. So
But they're
if
not part of MCAS either, and you need to be clear about that. Let's talk
I'm
about
not
apples
talking
and
about MCAS, I'm talking about Common Core and park. That's what you're heading to in this state because the Board of Education is voting to adopt park. That is the decision that has already been made by Commissioner Chester, sent to all the superintendents in this state last
Where is the
year.
letter?
I can send you a copy, it's on my computer.
I would love it.
It was sent by Lupini, who was superintendent in Brookline, and the head of, what is the Association of State Superintendents, has an initial.
MASS.
MASS, Massachusetts Association of State Superintendents. He is speaking on behalf of state superintendents, and here is the letter he sent to the school committee as of October 14th. Please give me your card with an email address, and I will send you that letter as soon as I get back to my computer. But we've been discussing Common Core and park, and what is going to happen is that the park test is going to be the same test for all the states that are in the park consortium, which means that they are basing their test items on what is in Common Core. That was the whole point of having them adopt Common Core. States could adopt up to 15% more of whatever they wanted. Every state knew that. Only about 5 or 6 states did, by the way. But it didn't matter. The point is that none of what these states have added on is going to be assessed by the consortium for park. And that's what we've been trying to say.
So if Massachusetts is up here, and New Mexico and Arkansas is down here, and they're in a consortium with 12 states, right? Where do you think it's going to go? So you think Arkansas is going to go to Massachusetts level?
No,
No.
we're not.
It's going to be a race to the middle. That's what this is all about.
I just have a quick question. So far there's been,
Please give me your email.
if I'm right, there's been around 4 states that have repealed or withdrawn from the Common Core after accepting it. What have they done and what can we do to head in that direction? I mean, how long did it take them with forms and?
They still aren't totally out of the woods. Let me point out this way, there's been such a thicket of legal layers, boards of education decisions, Department of Education decisions, that even those states like Oklahoma, because I've been to them and I've been testifying and working with them, trying to help them get legislation that sets up committees where they could develop stronger competitive standards. And the problem in like Oklahoma and South Carolina, Indiana, where I spoke several times to Governor Pence, who wanted me to evaluate the English language arts standards, they have gotten warmed over Common Core standards back again because they have set up committees of teachers deliberately that would give them back the very standards that they said they didn't want, but they put a name on it. Florida has what are called the Sunshine Standards, Common Core.
But we already have the top standards, so to.
Not anymore, we don't.
We have them in writing.
Yeah.
But, so if we were to get rid of Common Core and go back to those, why would that be, that wouldn't be an issue, we wouldn't need to rewrite
Well,
ours.
the thing is that, so Governor Baker, when he ran in 2010, he was opposed to Common Core. In fact, I think he might have been the only one to testify against Common Core adoption in front of the Board of Education. Okay? Now that he is governor 4 years later, I mean, you just know in these states, there's not only a lot of lobbying money come in. I mean, look, the Gates Foundation is a $40 billion foundation. They've spent well over $250 million advocating for this. So that you have private lobby money dumping in states. And you've got the U.S. Department of Education that has basically been threatening any state that tries to pull out. There's a lot of factors here. I guess the point of it is that, as I mentioned earlier, the big decision before us is whether we adopt Park in November. If we adopt Park, it's over. If we don't adopt Park and stay with MCAS, then gradually Governor Baker will get control over the Board of Ed, and then there's a prospect. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but there's a prospect that you could go back to the higher standards that we had before.
Actually,
But the only thing that will change that is that if folks in this audience and other people that are interested make it clear to the governor and the Secretary of Education not to adopt Park.
you have to opt your kids out and pass warrant articles or questions because they're not going to listen. They have already committed themselves. This is where we disagree ourselves on strategy. But let me go to your question. What do you need to do to get a decent set of standards for your kids to address in your own schools? Your school committee, any day, can adopt any better set of standards it wants to. It still has that legal authority, statutory authority. Now, you can tell your superintendent and the teachers to address it. The catch is that the state still has the legal authority to require local school districts to offer the state-based test, which will be PARCC.
Okay,
So that's the problem. And what I have been saying for a year is that this needs to be tested by the state Supreme Court. A local school committee still has 400-year-old statutory authority, or at least 200 years since there was a state constitution, to decide what policies it wants its local school district to follow. If the state says you've got to use the PARCC test, which is based on Common Core standards that are common to 12 states, and you've got a different curriculum and a different set of standards, a school committee can say, in theory, we're not going to have the state impose a test that doesn't match our curriculum and is not based on our own legally adopted standards. The state will say, sorry, state statute says we must require you to take PARCC. You can say, sorry, we're not going to take a test that is incompatible with what our kids have been studying. So let's go to the state Supreme Court and hash it out there.
So the
I don't know
town
what can happen, but we've got to have enough gumption to practice civil disobedience.
But the individual towns, then, you're saying, do have the right to
Every
basically
town
opt out
or
of Common
city
Core,
has-
though? Opt out of Common Core and bring back the
Yeah.
Massachusetts
Now, you'll
frameworks.
have a different problem in that there's still NCLB to face. The problem is that there are deep, wider problems. Right now, ESEA is being hashed out by Congress. That's the Elementary Secondary Education Act with Title I money. That may not mean anything to you, but that is what NCLB comes from. It's a reauthorization of Lyndon Johnson's ESEA, which was first authorized in 1965. Now, if that is authorized, reauthorized the way the wording now reads, you may be denied at the local level any opportunity to develop any standards you want. We don't know what's going to happen yet. There are things going on right now at Congress level, works in progress, that could change the entire picture any week now. That is why it's very difficult to predict the future. All you can do is try at the local level to enforce what you know you have legally elected school committee members statutorily able to do, which is to vote for your own standards, tell your own teaching staff what to do, and then wait for someone to call out the National Guard.
It's more than that, because this, we have a political process in this country, and we're at the beginning of a presidential election season, which means all of those folks are out there campaigning. Common Core is showing up as a national issue everywhere. All of those candidates are being asked about it. The more vocal you are, so whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you are getting mail from your county committee, whatever party you are. Make sure you let them know. Make sure every candidate that's running for state legislature, for Congress, for US Senate, whatever it is, they get asked, where do you stand? And if you get anything other than the word I'm against it, then don't give them money and make sure they know why. That's how you change things in this nation. We really do have a political process. And you don't have to, like everything that Sandra said, yes, you should do, but you don't have to just wait for a Supreme Court. You can make changes by making sure that your elected representatives, both at the federal level and at the state level, know exactly what you think and exactly what you're against. I get asked, and this isn't my first rodeo, as they say. This isn't the first time that the federal government attempted to do this. They attempted to do this in the 90s, then it was 1992, and it was called Outcome-Based Education and School to Work. It's exactly the same program, a different name. And I was one of the leading national opponents then, too. I was in every state but Hawaii. I even debated it in Alaska. And we made such a ruckus that we won. We stopped them. And it's taken them all these years to come back. It was moms that stood up then, too. And I get asked all the time, are you going to win? Yeah. How long will it take? Well, that depends on you. Why moms? Because, it's been said that fathers will die for their children, and God love you, gentlemen. That's true. Mothers will kill. The federal government declared war on the children of America. They forgot. They all had moms and grandmoms attached. And there will never come a day when we give them away. So will we win? Yes. How fast depends on how active you are. So the worst thing you can do is nothing. Is to say, oh, that was awful. You need to be involved.
On that note, we have gone over time. So
Can I just ask one last question, because I want to directly
ask them.
address.
They're doing.
I'm speaking now as a school committee member, and I share a lot of the concerns that have been expressed tonight, but I have to say I think your suggestion that the school committee should set the curriculum is extremely irresponsible. We have a curriculum coordinator whose specific job is to try to align our curriculum to the state standards, which MCAS is the tool in which it's measured. So what it sounds to me like you're saying is that who cares how we do on MCAS? We have the statutory authority to implement whatever curriculum we would like. That's going to be reflected in our MCAS scores, which in turn is going to affect the state funding our children get. Yes, it is.
No,
I know that for a fact.
No, first of all, let me just tell you, really great schools, whether they're private or parochial or public schools, they shape and direct their own destiny. They don't wait for other people to tell them what it is that they're going to teach. They take control of it, okay?
And that's what you
what
did to a curriculum coordinator.
A school committee is democratically elected to represent the interests of the parents and the people in that community. They shouldn't wait for people in Washington to tell them what to teach or not to teach. That's a decision that is a local decision.
I
It's
understand
not-
that, but this is a semantical argument.
you know, and it's not a semantical argument. The other thing too is that Chapter 70 is not determined by MCAS scores. It's determined by economic need. It is a formula that is driven by a progressive model. So you basically, the poorer you are, the more poor and minority students you have, more special needs students have, the more money you're going to get. Okay,
You're saying that there's no
correlation
incentive
between your
to do
MCAS
well on
scores and what
MCAS.
your
Is that
and
what
your
you're
Chapter
saying?
7. Yes, the guy who wrote the Ed Reform
I'm
Law
sorry, but
sits
that's
in the
correct.
office next door to me. His name's Tom Birmingham. He was the one who wrote much of the Ed Reform Law. It is not dictated by MCAS scores. It's
So
debated.
why take
it's
MCAS?
dictated
Why take any test then?
because it's the law, first of all. But
It's the law.
it's not driven. The MCAS is driven by.
He wrote it into the statute that the state tests would be given.
That's right.
That's
It is
what
not.
was part
You don't
So
get
there's no
money.
ramifications for doing poorly in an MCAS test?
You
for the
do not
district?
get state money based on your MCAS scores. You get it? It's based on need. It's a
The
totally
formula
erroneous
was
argument.
separate from the MCAS scores. You'd have to read the act to see that,
So,
or call up Tom Birmingham.
What are the ramifications of doing poorly on MCAS? Can you explain that to the people?
The ramifications have been there since 94.
Explain what they are specifically.
You get rated as to whether you need help by the Department of Ed or whether you are beyond help. They have categories for placing schools. They're not evaluating teachers. They're evaluating schools.
I understand that.
And that's big difference with Common Core, which is going to evaluate teachers. They have pushed the envelope further. They want to evaluate
I agree with you on that, and on that point, but this is two
student
different
scores.
arguments.
But MCAS was based on how schools performed. And then there would be categories for the schools, so that those that needed help, that were below a certain level of achievement, whatever the rating for a number for the score was, would get help or would have to be visited by the compliance unit at the Department of Ed.
And why have a curriculum coordinator in any
No,
school
no,
district?
you
No, I'm
still
asking a
need
question, why?
She's still there. I'm not telling the school committee to write the curriculum. You approve it. You still have your school staff do their work professionally, but they report to you, the school committee. They don't report to Washington.
I never suggested they did.
No, I didn't say you did, but you are still in charge as a school committee member of whatever curriculum is here in Halifax.
I understand that, but to suggest that we should ignore the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks and somehow impose our whatever political direction the wind is blowing.
No, sir, look, in 2005, long before Common Core came along, I did a research, and I've got it with me, I'm looking at 80 school districts, which is a pretty good sample of school districts across Massachusetts, and like 60% of the districts never aligned with the MCAS or the MCAS standards, right? So they even under the old standards, which were outstanding standards, and even under MCAS as a high-stakes test, 60% of the districts didn't do it. I can show you it back there. This is a local decision. It's a local decision.
I understand it's a local decision, but it may not be a practical one.
Well, I mean,
In what sense? If your children are being deprived, this is the decision you make
I'm not
in conjunction with
opposed
parents.
to a lot of the things that are being said here tonight, okay? My issue is very specific. You suggested basically civil disobedience by ignoring the curriculum that's currently in place in favor of local control. I understand theoretically we can make any policy that we wish to, okay?
Yeah.
But that may not be prudent, okay? We should be looking at what is going to best serve our children.
That's
How
right.
can it
That's
be
right.
best? I know the standardized
That's
testing,
right.
and but like it or not, it is in fact a reality here. So we want our children to do as well as they can in these particular tests.
No, you want your students to do as well as they can. We live in a state that doesn't have oil, we don't have timber. This is a state that for centuries has survived by its brains. We've got colleges and universities and hospitals and microtech and biotech. If you want to make a decision as a school committee member to put your kids 2 years behind their international competitor in a world that is increasingly more competitive, go ahead and do it. I'm just saying that is the real way to hurt kids, not by saying we're going to go to a higher standard that we can control.
So we should ignore the curriculum frameworks and not choose,
I'm
not
saying
what they
if
are.
the
Even if they're changed and they
if
like
they're
to
not
do it.
good ones, yes. If they're not good standards, and there's a lot of evidence that these are not good standards, I would say yes, ignore them.
What you do is ask some college teaching experts in math, English, science, to look at those courses that you give in your high school and ask if those courses would prepare students who do successfully in them for their beginning freshman classes for credit. Get outside independent expert opinion on the quality of the courses you offer in math and science in particular in your high school. That's what I've been asking states to do. Don't listen to me, I'm not an expert on math or science to begin with. Go to your own higher ed institution experts who know math and science and know what students need if they're going to be successful as freshmen in their 4-year undergraduate majors in a STEM field if that's what they want. Find out from them what they think of the quality of your courses. Maybe you have some living here in the area. I don't know, but that's what I would be doing. Bring in higher ed experts. They were excluded from the process in every state when state boards made the decision. I couldn't get our state board to invite our higher education experts in math and science to give us their opinion on these so-called college readiness standards. Why not? The deal is, and that's part of the problem, and there's a University of Delaware agreement that supports this, and now there are about 600 colleges and universities in the country doing this. They've all decided that whatever the college readiness cut score or pass score is on grade 11 for either Smarter Balance, or I think it's only Smarter Balance so far, not PAR. Whatever that cut score is, they will be able to take for credit any freshman courses in math if their students go on to the university level in their states. They haven't even seen the test. They haven't had the faculty. I wrote to the person in the Delaware Department of Ed, and I said, did any of the faculty at the University of Delaware even look at the test to know that this is a test whose passing score would mean acceptable coursework at the University of Delaware for freshmen? She said, contact the universities and find out for yourself, basically. But she sent out the press release saying that the presidents had all agreed that this cut score was going to enable anyone finishing grade 11 in a Delaware high school to take 4 credit courses. It's happening here in Massachusetts. Speak to Professor Richard Bisk, who is a math professor at Worcester State University. He's been going to the Board of Higher Ed. He's been writing articles I can send you about the pass score that's going to be used and the grade point average that will allow students to go to our university system and get 4 credit courses in their freshman year. And he is asking, as a math prof, what mathematics will they be able to take depending on where that cut score is set at grade 11? Algebra 1? I mean, you've got to find out, the devil is in these details, but get your own higher ed experts. Invite anyone you want from any university in the state. Ask them to look at the content of your math and science courses in high school and just give you their academic expert opinion. Why would you want the Board of Ed people to do that when most of them don't know any math or science? Ask people who do and find out what they have to say. I'm open-ended on this. I think you should want, every school committee in this state should be doing that.
I am a school committee member, and I wouldn't dream of trying to design the curriculum for our elementary school.
That's right, but you could invite outside experts to take a look at the content and ask your own math and science teachers to talk to them about whether they've included the topics that are necessary for successful work at the college level.
I think we have to end it there. We thank you all for coming, and don't forget to vote on Saturday, March 16th.
Jean,
Yes,
can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I like to- Could you just walk